Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Monday, everybody. Of course, it is not a happy Monday for the families of the 15 people killed and more than 40 injured in a fire over the weekend. Early Saturday morning, a fire ripped through an apartment building in the comparatively wealthy city of Nanjing, eastern China, a few hours northwest of Shanghai. According to local state media, officials suggested the blaze started on the first floor of the building, where electric bikes were being stored, but the official cause of the fire is still under investigation. The incident has sparked anger online, with netizens complaining that fires and deadly accidents from poor infrastructure are all too common in China. Just last month, Xi Jinping called for deep reflection and greater efforts to curb the frequent occurrence of safety accidents in response to a spate of fires. A month ago, 13 school children died in a fire in a school dormitory in Henan province, a few days after 39 died in a fire which started in a shop in Jiangxi province. Now for the main stories, and first up, we begin with the economy. Over the weekend, the National Bureau of Statistics published official home prices for the month of January, and analysts have been arguing over whether the numbers are poor but hopeful or just poor. Real estate has for years been a popular investment for people in China, and the slowdown in the sector has had widespread ramifications. Consumer confidence is near its lowest level in more than 3 decades, the economy is suffering from deflation, and of course the effect on local government revenue has been devastating in some regions. Home prices in mainland China fell in January, but the pace of decline, month on month, slowed for both new and lived-in units, amid persistent weakness in consumer sentiment. Prices of newly built homes in 70 large and medium cities fell 0.37% last month, slowing from 0.45% in December. Thus, China's home prices, month on month, declined at a slower pace for both new and existing units in January, the first signs of improvement in 10 months. Signaling, some argue, that Beijing's intensifying efforts to combat the property crisis may finally be bearing fruit. Yan Yuejin, research director at eHouse China Research and Development Institute, for example, expressed on the data, quote, "The slide in home prices may have passed its worst period," end quote. Policymakers have increased pressure on banks to boost their property loans, with at least 124 billion yuan, $17 billion of loans for property works earmarked, and a range of housing prices from cash-strapped developers, including Country Garden Holdings Co. Limited, put on the list. Others remain skeptical, however, pointing out that due to a de facto price floor and the sensitivity of the housing market generally, that these official data are especially unreliable, and even in this unreliable state, they are still negative. Liao Yuan, head of property research at Centerline, for example, expressed on the new numbers, quote, "The bottom for the housing prices is far from being reached. It will not happen in 2024, end quote. Others take a middle way, warning that a meaningful sales rebound depends on even stronger policies. Larry Hu, head of China economics at Macquarie Group Limited, observed, quote, "These current measures may still not be enough to turn the market around," end quote. Commentators were also quick to point out that year-on-year comparisons were much worse than month-on-month. Year-on-year, new home prices fell 1.24%, accelerating from December's 0.89% decline. Even new home prices in China's first-tier cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, the hottest housing markets in the country, dropped 0.5% in January year-on-year. Second-hand prices across the country did even worse, falling by 4.4% in January compared with a year earlier. It was the steepest such decline in almost 9 years. Second-hand home prices fell in all first-tier cities by between 3.7% and 6.1%. There is also private survey data from Real Estate Information Corp, which show that China's 100 largest developers recorded a deep slump in new home sales in January, with home sales by value down 34% year-on-year. Next up, US-China relations, but just quickly, as always, if you're enjoying today's episode, it's a huge help if you hit the like button. It's a huge help if you can subscribe as well. It's only 2 clicks of the mouse, but it's a huge help for me and the growth of the channel. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable too. I rely primarily on your support to keep going. Thank you so much everybody, as always, for the ongoing support. Next up, we have 2 developments in US-China relations to cover. Over the weekend, the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, said Beijing's efforts to covertly plant offensive malware inside US critical infrastructure networks is now at, quote, a scale greater than we've ever seen before, end quote, adding that this issue is now a defining national security threat. Wray called Volt Typhoon, quote, the tip of the iceberg. It's one of many such efforts by the Chinese, end quote. China, he said, is inserting, quote, offensive weapons within our critical infrastructure, poised to attack whenever Beijing decides the time is right, end quote. Volt Typhoon refers to a Chinese hacking network that was revealed last year to be lying dormant inside US critical infrastructure. A report released this month by agencies including the FBI and the NSA said Volt Typhoon hackers had maintained access to some US networks for 5 or more years. On Saturday, we discussed the leak related to iSoon, a private company used for hacking for hire services. But Wray's warning comes after a slew of other official concerns in Washington about top-down sophisticating hacking operations from Beijing. And of course, last week we saw too the White House announced a ban on Chinese-made port cranes over fears of spying. Despite evidence of a growing Chinese state-backed program, Beijing routinely denies any accusations of cyber attacks and espionage, calling the US the biggest hacking nation in the world. In his statement over the weekend, Wray said that AI translation has helped Chinese security operatives to, quote, more plausibly recruit assets, steal secrets, and rapidly process more of the information they are collecting, end quote, adding, quote, they already have built economic espionage and theft of personal and corporate data as a kind of bedrock of their economic strategy and are eagerly pursuing AI advancements to try to accelerate that process. End quote. Now, moving from the theme of competition to the theme of cooperation, in a piece of positive news, US-based outlet Bloomberg reports over the weekend that US and China are discussing new measures to prevent a wave of emerging market sovereign defaults. Quote, one of the most significant attempts in years at economic cooperation between the rival superpowers, end quote. The talks, the outlet writes, are broadly aimed at both easing the $400 billion plus annual debt service burden for poor countries and finding an alternative to the high borrowing rates these nations now face in the market. In addition to extending repayment times, other ideas are being discussed, which include increasing financing from the World Bank and other multilateral banks. A key point is to roll out these measures before countries default and enter formal restructuring talks with creditors. According to World Bank numbers, developing nations spent a record $443 billion on debt service payments in 2022 and warned of a lost decade of economic stagnation for these nations. Bloomberg writes that any resulting joint proposal on global sovereign debt issues between Washington and Beijing would likely need the support of the full group of 20, as well as the IMF and the World Bank. Quote, the trifecta that's struggling to resolve global debt distress issues since the pandemic, end quote. It would require the support of private creditors eventually as well. A joint US-China approach would be a breakthrough, as the two sides are the most powerful forces acting on many nations' debt workouts. Quote, Washington dominates the global financial architecture through the Treasury Department's influence on the IMF and World Bank, while Beijing essentially has veto power over many deals as the biggest creditor to developing nations, end quote. Regular viewers know that Beijing has emerged as a massive creditor to developing economies over the past decade as part of Xi Jinping's infrastructure-focused Belt and Road Initiative. Regarding this potential joint US-China approach to debt alleviation for the emerging world, Peking University professor of finance Michael Pettis posted a simple observation yesterday. Quote, great news, if serious. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful Monday. Have a productive week ahead. And I will see you all tomorrow.